He sat in the back corner of the municipal courthouse, hands folded in his lap, beard unkempt, clothes that had seen too many nights on park benches. The security guard had almost turned him away at the door, but it was a public hearing, and even the homeless had rights, they said with a shrug. So he sat quietly, waiting for his name to be called, waiting for justice that felt as distant as the life he'd once lived. The Honorable Patricia Whitman presided over Courtroom B with the kind of authority that came from 23 years on the bench and a reputation for zero tolerance. She was known for her efficiency, her sharp wit, and her particular disdain for what she called time wasters, the parade of society forgotten who cycled through her courtroom on minor charges. Today's docket was full of them: petty theft, public intoxication, trespassing, the usual suspects. She glanced at her watch, 2:47 p.m. The afternoon was dragging, and she had a dinner reservation at 7. Time to move things along. Next case, she announced without looking up from her papers. The People versus Daniel Robert Hayes. Violation of Municipal Ordinance 14.23. Unlawful camping in public spaces. The man in the back corner stood slowly, favoring his left leg, and made his way to the defendant's table. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had absorbed too much damage, too many hits, over too many years. The bailiff gestured for him to approach the bench. "State your full name for the record," Judge Whitman said, still not looking up. "Daniel Robert Hayes, Your Honor." His voice was quiet but clear, with the kind of steady tone that suggested someone accustomed to following orders, to showing respect even when none was shown in return. Judge Whitman finally looked up, and her expression immediately soured. The defendant standing before her looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. His hair was matted, his clothes stained, and she could smell him from 6 feet away. "Mr. Hayes," she began, her voice dripping with disdain, "you've been charged with setting up an illegal campsite in Riverside Park. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor, but I'd like to explain—" "Save it," she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I've heard every sob story in the book. Lost job, bad luck, hard times. The fact remains that you were illegally occupying public property, creating an eyesore, and frankly, a health hazard." Daniel stood straighter, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, not defiance, but dignity. "Your Honor, with respect, I've been trying to get into the shelter system for 6 months. The waiting list is not my concern, Mr. Hayes. My concern is maintaining order in this community. People shouldn't have to look at this," she gestured dismissively at his appearance, "when they're trying to enjoy a public park with their children." A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. The public defender assigned to the case, a young woman named Sarah Chun, who was drowning in a caseload of over 200 cases, glanced up from her notes. She'd only had 3 minutes to review Hayes's file before court started. "Your Honor," she interjected, "Mr. Hayes is a veteran. He's been experiencing difficulties." "Oh, here we go." Judge Whitman rolled her eyes. "Everyone's a veteran these days. Very convenient when you're facing charges, isn't it?" Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Saracen looked down at the file again, scanning quickly. There wasn't much there, just basic information, an address that was obviously outdated, and a small notation that made her pause. "Your Honor, if I may, Mr. Hayes serve in—" "I don't care if he served in the Peace Corps, Ms. Chan. The law is the law. Mr. Hayes, you are hereby sentenced to 30 days in county jail, with credit for time served. Maybe that will give you time to think about getting your life together and contributing something positive to society instead of being a burden on hard-working taxpayers." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. But before the bailiff could approach Daniel, Sarah Chen's voice rang out, stronger this time. "Your Honor, I must insist that you listen to the defendant's service record. Daniel Hayes is not just any veteran. He's—" "Ms. Chun, you are out of order. One more interruption, and you'll be held in contempt." But something in the public defender's voice had caught the attention of an older man sitting in the back row. He was well-dressed, in his 70s, with a ramrod-straight posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform. He had been waiting for his own case, a minor property dispute, but now he was listening intently. Daniel remained standing at attention, even as Judge Whitman dismissed him with another wave of her hand. "Bailiff, please escort Mr. Hayes." "Your Honor." The older man in the back row stood up, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you should know who you're sentencing." Judge Whitman's face flushed red. "Sir, you are out of order. This is my courtroom, and—" "Colonel James Patterson, United States Army, retired," the man said, stepping forward. "And I'm telling you that man standing before you is Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes, Medal of Honor recipient." The courtroom went dead silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment. Judge Whitman's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That's impossible. This man is clearly homeless, suffering from PTSD, struggling with addiction issues related to his combat injuries. Colonel Patterson's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Yes, Your Honor, he is like too many of our nation's heroes. But 16 years ago, Staff Sergeant Hayes threw himself on a grenade to save his unit in Fallujah. He spent 2 years in military hospitals. He's been fighting for his life ever since." Daniel hadn't moved. He stood there, still at attention, staring straight ahead. Sarah Chung was frantically flipping through the file, and suddenly the notation she'd seen earlier made sense. It wasn't just veteran status marked in file. It was much more than that. "Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The file, it shows Medal of Honor recipient. I'm sorry, I didn't see it before. There's so much paperwork and so little time." Judge Whitman looked like she'd been slapped. The color drained from her face as the implications began to sink in. Around the courtroom, people were pulling out their phones. In 2024, news traveled fast, and a judge mocking a Medal of Honor recipient was exactly the kind of story that could ruin careers. I wasn't aware," she stammered. "No, Your Honor, you weren't," Colonel Patterson said, his voice growing harder. "You didn't bother to find out. You saw a homeless man and decided he was worthless. You saw someone down on his luck and assumed he had never contributed anything to society. You looked at a hero and saw only a burden." The bailiff stood frozen, unsure whether to proceed with the escort or wait for new orders. Daniel finally turned his head slightly to look at Colonel Patterson, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, he spoke without being asked a question. "Thank you, sir, but she's right about one thing. I am homeless. I am a burden. I can't hold down a job. I can't sleep through the night, and I can't make it through a week without drinking myself into oblivion just to stop the nightmares. The medal doesn't change any of that." His voice was steady, but there was a weight to it that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. This wasn't self-pity. It was simple, brutal honesty. "But I wasn't camping in that park because I'm lazy or because I don't care about laws," he continued. "I was there because it's the only place I found where I can sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. There's a tree line that faces east, and when the sun comes up, it reminds me of the sunrise over the Euphrates. It's the only time I feel peaceful." Judge Whitman was no longer looking at him. She was staring down at her hands, and her fingers were trembling slightly. Colonel Patterson wasn't finished. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to make a call." "Hey, a call to the Pentagon. You see, when Medal of Honor recipients are mistreated by government officials, certain people like to know about it. Important people. People who have the power to make sure such treatment receives appropriate attention." The judge's face went white. "That won't be... surely we can..." "Oh, but I insist," Colonel Patterson said, pulling out his phone. "In fact, I think this conversation needs to happen right now." He dialed a number from memory and put the phone on speaker. After 2 rings, a crisp voice answered. "Office of the Secretary of Defense. This is General Morrison." "Tom, it's Jim Patterson. I'm in a courthouse in Ohio, and I need you to hear something." Judge Whitman looked like she might faint. Around the courtroom, people were recording everything. The story was already starting to spread on social media, with hashtags that would be trending within the hour. "Jim, what's going on?" General Morrison's voice filled the courtroom through the phone speaker. A judge just sentenced Medal of Honor recipient Daniel Hayes to 30 days in jail for sleeping in a park. But before she did that, she told him he was a burden on society and questioned whether he was really a veteran. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When General Morrison spoke again, his voice was arctic cold. "Put me on with the judge." Colonel Patterson held out the phone to Judge Whitman, who looked at it like it was a live grenade. With shaking hands, she took it. This is Judge Patricia Whitman." "Judge Whitman, this is General Robert Morrison, Deputy Secretary of Defense. I'm calling to inform you that your treatment of Staff Sergeant Hayes has been brought to my attention. I'm also calling to inform you that a full investigation into your conduct will be initiated by the Department of Justice within the hour." Judge Whitman's voice came out as barely a squeak. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out. You saw a veteran in crisis and decided he was disposable. That, Judge Whitman, is exactly the kind of attitude that perpetuates a veteran suicide crisis that claims 22 lives every single day." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Daniel remained standing at attention, but tears were now flowing silently down his cheeks. General Morrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore, Judge Whitman, I'm instructing my staff to review every case involving veterans that has come before your court in the past 5 years. If we find a pattern of this kind of treatment, you'll be hearing from more than just the Department of Justice. Please, I can correct this. I can change the sentence. You can and you will. But the damage to your reputation and your career, that ship has already sailed. In about 30 minutes, this story will be on every major news network in the country. By tomorrow morning, it will be international news. The video of you mocking a Medal of Honor recipient will be played millions of times." Judge Whitman looked around the courtroom and saw a dozen phones pointed at her, recording everything. Her career was indeed over, and she knew it. "Tom," Colonel Patterson said, taking back the phone, "what can we do for Sergeant Hayes right now?" "Already working on it. I'm sending a team from the Cleveland, Virginia Medical Center to pick him up within the hour. He'll receive full medical evaluation, housing assistance, and whatever psychiatric care he needs. This should have happened years ago." Daniel spoke up, his voice still quiet but stronger now. "I don't need special treatment, sir. I just need—" "Sergeant Hayes," General Morrison's voice came through the phone, "you threw yourself on a grenade to save 8 Marines. The least your country can do is give you a bed to sleep in and the medical care you've earned. This isn't special treatment. This is what should have been happening all along." Judge Whitman slowly stood up, her face a mask of humiliation and fear. "The court hereby dismisses all charges against Mr. Hayes. This session is adjourned." She practically ran from the courtroom, leaving behind a career, a reputation, and the wreckage of what had been, until an hour ago, a comfortable life built on the assumption that her authority was absolute. Colonel Patterson approached Daniel and extended his hand. "Sergeant Hayes, I'm sorry it took so long for someone to recognize you." Daniel shook his hand, and for the first time in years, he smiled. "Thank you, sir, for seeing me. We always see you, son. Sometimes it just takes us too long to speak up." As they waited for the VA team to arrive, word continued to spread. The story was picked up by veteran advocacy groups, military family networks, and news organizations across the country. Hashtag Justice for Daniel Hayes was trending on Twitter within 2 hours. Judge Whitman's photo was being shared alongside Daniel's Medal of Honor citation, creating a stark contrast that made the story even more powerful. The Cleveland, Virginia Medical Center dispatched their crisis intervention team, along with Dr. Maria Santos, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating combat veterans with PTSD. When they arrived at the courthouse, they found Daniel sitting quietly with Colonel Patterson, who had stayed with him the entire time. "Sergeant Hayes," Dr. Santos said, approaching with a kind of calm professionalism that immediately put people at ease. "I'm Dr. Santos. We're here to help you get the care you should have been receiving all along. Ma'am, I've tried the VA system before. It's complicated. I know it is, but things are going to be different this time. You have advocates now. You have people watching. And you have the full attention of the Secretary of Defense, who is personally ensuring that you receive everything you need. Colonel Patterson stood up. Sergeant, I'm going to give you my personal number. If anyone anywhere ever treats you with anything less than the respect you've earned, you call me immediately. Is that understood? Yes, sir. And Sergeant, there are thousands of veterans out there who are going through what you've been going through. Your story is going to help them too. Sometimes it takes one person's courage to change everything. As they helped Daniel into the VA medical transport vehicle, he turned back to look at the courthouse one more time. Through the windows, he could see reporters setting up cameras and photographers snapping pictures of the building. This little municipal courthouse in Ohio was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. But for Daniel, it represented something else entirely. It was the place where he stopped being invisible, where someone finally saw him not as a burden or a problem to be solved, but as a human being who had given everything for his country and deserved better than sleeping under a tree in a public park. Judge Patricia Whitman submitted her resignation the next morning. The State Judicial Conduct Board had received over 10,000 complaints within 24 hours, and impeachment proceedings had already been initiated. Her law license was suspended pending a full investigation, and she would never practice law again. The story made international headlines. U.S. Judge mocks homeless Medal of Honor recipient in court. Career ends within hours. It sparked a national conversation about how society treats its veterans, particularly those struggling with invisible wounds from their service. Daniel spent 3 weeks in inpatient treatment at the VA Medical Center. For the first time in years, he slept through the night. He participated in individual and group therapy, worked with occupational therapists, and slowly began to reconnect with the person he had been before the war changed everything. The VA housing coordinator found him a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and the benefits office finally straightened out his disability compensation, which had been delayed due to paperwork errors for over 2 years. But the biggest change was less tangible. Daniel was no longer alone. Veterans organizations from across the country reached out to offer support. Fellow Medal of Honor recipients called to check on him. A foundation that specialized in helping homeless veterans offered him a job as a peer counselor, working with other veterans who were struggling with similar challenges. I never thought I'd say this, Daniel told Dr. Santos during one of their sessions, but I'm grateful for what happened in that courtroom, not because of how the judge treated me, but because of what came after, because someone spoke up, because someone saw me as more than my circumstances. Dr. Santos smiled. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives create the opportunities for the best changes. Your story has already helped dozens of other veterans get the care they need. That's a pretty powerful legacy. It's not about legacy, Doc. It's about making sure no other veteran has to sleep in a park because they can't navigate the system. It's about making sure judges and politicians and bureaucrats remember that the homeless guy in front of them might be someone who risked his life for their freedom. 6 months later, Daniel was invited to speak at a national conference on veteran homelessness. As he walked to the podium, he thought about that moment in the courtroom when Colonel Patterson stood up and spoke the truth. How one person's courage to speak up had changed not just his life, but potentially the lives of thousands of other veterans. My name is Daniel Hayes, he began, looking out at an audience of policymakers, VA officials, and veteran advocates. 16 years ago, I threw myself on a grenade in Iraq. 8 months ago, I was sentenced to jail for sleeping in a park. Today, I'm here to make sure that never happens to another veteran again. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We don't need pity. We don't need to be treated like broken heroes or tragic figures. We just need to be seen as human beings who served our country and deserve the same dignity and respect as anyone else, regardless of our circumstances. The audience gave him a standing ovation, but Daniel was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about all the veterans who were still out there, still invisible, still struggling, still waiting for someone to see them and speak up. The battle wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But now he had allies, advocates, and a voice that people were finally ready to hear. Sometimes the most important victories don't happen on battlefields. Sometimes they happen in courtrooms and conference rooms, in the quiet moments when someone decides to stand up and say, "This isn't right. Sometimes they happen when society finally decides to see its heroes not as they are, but as they deserve to be treated. For Daniel Hayes, that moment came when he needed it most. And because of it, thousands of other veterans would never have to wait as long as he did for someone to finally see them, to finally speak up, to finally say their names with the respect they had always deserved. Staff Sergeant Daniel Robert Hayes, United States Army, Medal of Honor recipient, veteran advocate, voice for the voiceless. Hero in every sense of the word.